In 1958, the average American medicine cabinet held 6 items. By 1975, it held 43. Nothing about the human body changed in those 17 years. What changed was who was selling the solutions. These remedies were not abandoned because they stopped working. Number 1 on this list was used by military field medics in both world wars. Today, hospital wound care units have quietly brought it back after 60 years of using something that worked worse and cost more. They were abandoned because somebody got rich when you forgot them. 15. Clove oil and the toothache that couldn't wait for Monday. Rural Georgia, 1953. The nearest dentist was 40 miles away and closed until morning. A man had been awake since 2 with a molar that felt like a hot nail through the jaw. His wife went to the kitchen, took the tin of cloves she used for the holiday ham, ground several between 2 spoons, and packed the paste against the tooth. Within 10 minutes, the pain was gone. Not dulled, gone. The compound is eugenol, a naturally occurring phenol found in clove oil at concentrations up to 90%. It works as a local anesthetic by blocking the nerve signal that communicates pain. The FDA has approved eugenol as an active ingredient in dental analgesics. Dentists use it today in dry socket treatment and temporary fillings under the name zinc oxide eugenol cement. The molecule has been in continuous clinical use in professional dentistry for decades. What that woman did at the kitchen table in 1953 was pharmacologically identical to what a dental clinic charges $60 to perform today. The cloves cost 20 cents and lasted 3 years. 14. The mustard plaster and the chest that rattled. January 1951. A child home from school with a cough that had settled deep, breathing that made a sound at night. His mother mixed dry mustard powder with flour, added warm water until it made a thick paste, spread it across a folded cloth, and laid it over the child's chest for 15 minutes while she sat in the chair beside the bed. By the following evening, he was breathing clear. Ground mustard seed contains a compound called sinigrin. When sinigrin contacts moisture, it converts to allyl isothiocyanate, the same sharp, volatile compound that makes horseradish bite. Applied to skin, it acts as a counter-irritant, drawing blood to the surface, increasing local circulation, and loosening mucus that had hardened in the bronchial passages. It is the same mechanism behind modern capsaicin patches used in pain management and respiratory therapy today. A British medical field manual from 1919 recommended mustard plasters for pneumonia complications. A review in the Journal of Ethnopharmacology confirmed the counter-irritant mechanism as clinically sound. Nobody sells mustard plasters anymore. The ingredients cost 11 cents. 13. Salt water and the throat that was heading somewhere dark. Every grandmother in every country in the world has given this instruction, and every generation has dismissed it as superstition. A 2005 study in the American Journal of Preventive Medicine followed hundreds of participants through cold and flu season. The group that gargled with plain warm salt water 3 times per day reduced upper respiratory infections by 40% compared to the group that did not. 40%. The mechanism is not complicated. Salt water draws fluid from swollen, inflamed tissue through osmosis, reducing the swelling directly. It disrupts bacterial and viral cell membranes on contact, and it rinses the mucosal lining of the throat where pathogens anchor before they establish a real infection. The study's conclusion was the same thing grandmothers had been saying for 100 years. Gargle before you feel sick, not after. The solution costs less than a penny per use. The medicated sprays that replaced it start at $7. 12. Petroleum jelly and the cut that healed clean. A child cuts his hand badly on a farm in Kansas, 1954. His mother cleans it, dries it, and covers it with a thick layer of petroleum jelly under a folded cloth. It heals without a scar in 12 days. Her neighbor, who applied nothing and let the wound dry out the way people had been told was correct, got a scar she carried for 50 years. Petroleum jelly works through what wound care specialists now call moist wound healing. It creates an occlusive barrier that keeps the wound hydrated while blocking bacterial entry. A study published in JAMA Dermatology compared petroleum jelly directly against prescription antibiotic ointment for post-surgical wound care. Petroleum jelly performed equivalently, not almost as well, equivalently, at less than 1 cent per application. The dermatology community now considers it the gold standard for minor wound care. The pharmacies that replaced it with branded antibiotic creams through the 1970s and 1980s were selling an equivalent product at 100 times the price. The answer was already in the cabinet. It just did not have a brand name. 11. Witch hazel and the skin that wouldn't settle. The brown bottle sat on every American bathroom shelf from about 1900 to about 1970. Then it started disappearing. Witch hazel is a distillate of the bark and leaves of Hamamelis virginiana, a shrub native to the eastern United States. Native American medicinal use of the plant is documented back centuries. By the 1950s, it was in every home for cuts, bruises, razor burn, and general inflammation. The active compounds are tannins, specifically hamamelitanin, which tighten tissue, reduce swelling, and demonstrate measurable antimicrobial activity against bacteria and viruses in laboratory conditions. Research in a European pediatric journal found witch hazel preparations comparable to hydrocortisone for skin inflammation in children with fewer side effects. Preparation H originally derived its effectiveness almost entirely from witch hazel. The reformulated version sold today has removed it and replaced it with synthetic compounds that provide a fraction of what the original delivered. The bottle that left the bathroom shelf was doing more than anyone gave it credit for. It cost 60 cents in 1958. The products that replaced it start at $14. Here is what keeps appearing behind every item on this list. These remedies were not phased out in the years when researchers found something better. They were phased out in the years directly following the launch of a competing commercial product. Witch hazel declined in the same decade. Synthetic skin toners colonized pharmacy shelves. Cod liver oil left kitchen cabinets in the decade that mass-market multivitamins arrived. A home remedy cannot be patented. It cannot be branded or trademarked. It generates no quarterly earnings. The post-war pharmaceutical expansion was not built on discovery. It was built on replacement. Find something that works, package a synthetic version, spend enough on advertising to make the original seem old-fashioned. Collect the margin for the next 50 years. The knowledge did not fail. It was simply made to look like it had. 10. Epsom salt and the back that locked. A railroad worker in 1955 came home bent sideways, muscle spasm so severe his wife had to help him through the door. She ran a bath, poured in 2 cups of Epsom salt, and told him to stay in for 30 minutes. He walked out upright. Epsom salt is magnesium sulfate. Magnesium is involved in over 300 enzymatic processes in the human body, including muscle contraction and release. Research from the University of Birmingham measured significant increases in blood magnesium following Epsom salt baths, confirming that transdermal absorption through the skin during soaking is real. Magnesium deficiency is now documented in nearly half of all American adults and produces exactly the kind of chronic muscle cramping and tension that Epsom salt baths have been used to treat for 2 centuries. The warm water relaxes acute spasm. The magnesium does the deeper cellular work. That man walked out of the bath without a prescription, without a copay, without a muscle relaxant that would have left him too foggy to work the next morning. A 5-pound bag of Epsom salt cost 35 cents in 1955. The chemistry has not changed. 9. Cod liver oil and the winter that didn't break them. The spoon appeared every morning in October and disappeared in March. A tablespoon given without ceremony, sometimes chased with orange juice when the family had it. Children complained, mothers insisted. Nobody called it a supplement. They called it prevention. Cod liver oil contains vitamins A and D in concentrated form, along with omega-3 fatty acids. Vitamin D deficiency impairs T-cell activation, which is the immune system's primary mechanism for fighting viral infection. A 2017 meta-analysis in the British Medical Journal, covering 25 randomized controlled trials and more than 11,000 participants, found vitamin D supplementation reduced acute respiratory infection risk by 12% overall and by more than 50% in people who were severely deficient. The mothers lining their children up at the kitchen table every October morning were doing exactly what those 11,000 clinical trial participants did under medical supervision, 6 decades before the trial existed. The bottle cost 40 cents and lasted a family a month. The vitamin D supplements that replaced it cost $20 and deliver a fraction of what the original contained. 8. Oatmeal in the bath and the itch that finally broke. Chicken pox moved through a household in 1957 like a slow fire. One child brought it home Monday. By Friday, it had 3 more. What mothers knew was that you filled the tub with lukewarm water, ground rolled oats fine between your palms or in a cloth, and poured them in. Children soaked for 20 minutes and came out calmer, the burning itch reduced to something a child could sleep through. The FDA has formally approved colloidal oatmeal as a skin protectant for exactly this use, citing its effectiveness for rashes, eczema, and chickenpox. The compounds responsible are avenanthramides, a group of polyphenols found only in oats, which inhibit the release of histamine and inflammatory compounds in skin tissue. Aveeno built an entire commercial skincare line on this single biochemical fact and sells it back to you at $14 a bottle. The rolled oats in the kitchen cabinet cost $1.50. The mother who ground them in her hands in 1957 was doing the chemistry correctly. She just did not know what the compounds were called. 7. Warm milk and the sleep that came. A small glass of warm milk, sometimes with a spoonful of honey stirred in, was the last thing many children in the 1950s tasted before bed. It was not sentiment only, it was chemistry, understood through observation across generations. Milk contains tryptophan, the amino acid precursor to serotonin and melatonin, the hormones that govern the sleep cycle. Warming the milk increases the availability of casein proteins, one of which produces a mild calming effect through a mechanism researchers have compared to low-dose benzodiazepines without the dependency and without the morning fog. Research in a European nutrition journal found measurable sleep quality improvement in participants given casein hydrolysate before bed. Zolpidem, sold as Ambien, became one of the most prescribed drugs in American history after its 1992 approval. Listed side effects include sleepwalking, memory loss, and physical dependency. The warm glass on the nightstand cost 4 cents, acted through the same neurological pathways, and never once sent anyone driving down the highway in their sleep. 6. Ginger and the nausea that had no bottom. When a child came home pale and shaking, when a pregnant woman could not get through a morning, the answer in a 1950s kitchen was ginger steeped in hot water for 5 minutes. The compounds responsible, gingerols and shogaols, act on serotonin receptors in the gastrointestinal tract. These are the same receptor sites targeted by ondansetron, the anti-nausea medication used for chemotherapy patients that costs between $20 and $40 per pill. A review in the British Journal of Anesthesia, analyzing 12 clinical trials, found ginger as effective as metoclopramide, a standard anti-nausea prescription for postoperative nausea. The United States Navy now recommends ginger for motion sickness in personnel who cannot take antihistamines due to alertness requirements. The route validated by oncology wards, by surgical teams, and by the American military was sitting in the spice rack the whole time. A tablespoon of ground ginger costs 11 cents. 5. Apple cider vinegar and the ear that wouldn't clear. Strip away decades of exaggerated claims, and what remains is acetic acid, a documented antimicrobial compound with measured activity against Staphylococcus aureus, E. coli, and Candida. Research published in scientific reports tested apple cider vinegar directly against fluconazole-resistant Candida strains. The vinegar was effective where the pharmaceutical antifungal was not. In 1955, outer ear infections were treated at home with diluted vinegar dropped into the ear canal. The mechanism was sound. Acetic acid disrupts the biofilm that pathogenic bacteria use to anchor in the ear canal lining. Some ear, nose, and throat specialists still recommend dilute acetic acid as a first-line intervention for chronic outer ear infections before escalating to antibiotics. The mothers who tilted their children's heads to the side and counted the drops were performing a targeted chemical intervention that remains in clinical use today. The bottle cost 19 cents. The prescription ear drops that replaced it cost $60 and carry a warning label about resistant organisms that the vinegar does not produce. 4. Chicken soup and the cold that broke on day 3. Every culture on Earth has a version of this. Every one. That alone should have been treated as evidence. In 2000, Dr. Stephen Rennard at the University of Nebraska Medical Center published a study in the journal Chest examining the specific biological mechanisms of chicken soup on upper respiratory infection. The findings were precise. Chicken soup inhibited neutrophil chemotaxis, meaning it slowed the migration of white blood cells to the infection site in a way that reduced the self-inflicted inflammatory damage that makes a cold feel the way it does. The misery of a cold is largely the immune system's overcorrection. The soup modulated that response in a measurable way that no single pharmaceutical ingredient had matched. It was not just the warmth. It was not just hydration. The combination of long-simmered chicken, vegetables, and the compounds released into the broth over hours produced the effect. Peer-reviewed, published, confirmed. The woman who stayed up past midnight in 1954 to make sure the broth had gone long enough, who made her sick child eat 3 bowls before she let him sleep, was practicing medicine. She was just not charging for the visit. 3. Garlic and the infection that turned. Crush a raw clove of garlic and the enzyme allinase contacts allin and produces allicin, one of the most potent naturally occurring antimicrobial compounds ever identified. A controlled trial published in Advances in Therapy gave one group a garlic supplement and another, a placebo, through a full cold and flu season. The garlic group had 63% fewer colds. When they did get sick, they recovered faster. Allicin has demonstrated measurable activity against methicillin-resistant Staphylococcus aureus, MRSA, in laboratory conditions where most available antibiotics have failed. Research found garlic-derived alicin compounds effective against the majority of MRSA strains tested. The pharmaceutical industry has not been able to synthesize a stable, patentable version of allicin that retains its full activity, which means they cannot own the mechanism, which means there is no advertising campaign behind it, no pharmacy display, no sample pack in the doctor's office. The clove of garlic has remained free, effective, and unprofitable since the first person noticed that crushing one against a wound kept the wound from turning. 2. Honey on the wound that would not close. In 1944, a surgeon in a field hospital in France packed an infected wound with raw honey when the sulfa drugs ran out. The wound did not become infected. The patient walked out. Decades later, researchers began the systematic investigation into exactly why. Honey's antimicrobial activity operates through 4 separate mechanisms simultaneously. Its low water content dehydrates bacteria by drawing moisture out of them. Its low pH is directly hostile to pathogen growth. The enzyme glucose oxidase produces hydrogen peroxide continuously at the wound site. And in Manuka honey specifically, a compound called methyl glyoxal provides an additional layer of antibacterial activity that persists even after the other mechanisms are neutralized. 4 mechanisms at the same time. By the early 2000s, medical-grade Manuka honey had received approval from regulatory bodies in the United States, Europe, and Australia for clinical wound care. It is now used in hospital settings for chronic wounds, burns, and surgical site infections that have stopped responding to antibiotics. Wounds that were not responding to the best drugs available began closing with honey. A 2011 study found honey outperformed dextromethorphan, the active ingredient in most commercial cough medicines, for reducing nighttime cough in children and improving sleep quality in both the child and the parents. Honey costs $3 a jar. The cough syrup it outperformed costs $9. The bacteria that have evolved resistance to nearly every antibiotic developed in the last 80 years have not developed resistance to honey. To become resistant, they would need to solve 4 unrelated biological problems simultaneously. Evolution does not work that fast. It never has. The thing that was already in the cabinet was one of the most sophisticated antimicrobial systems modern science has ever examined. Nobody who sold it needed a patent. Nobody who used it needed an explanation. It worked. That was enough. These 15 remedies disappeared from American homes in a span of about 20 years. Not because researchers found something better, because someone found something they could sell. The medicine cabinet that held 6 things in 1958 held 43 things by 1975. The 6 things worked better than the 43. Pick one from this list. Try it the way it was meant to be tried. Come back to the comments and tell me what happened. The next video is already waiting.